Picking parts for your PC does not have to be hard, even if you have no idea what you're doing. I'm gonna walk you through the process of how to do it. I'm gonna try and make it as simple as possible. At the end of the video, I'll show you some ideal parts lists that you can just copy paste for a couple of different budgets, and you can buy everything new off Amazon. So you have to ask yourself two questions. What are you gonna be doing, and how much are you willing to spend? Because this will determine exactly what parts you need. The largest part of your decision making will revolve around your CPU-GPU combo, or the processor and the graphics card. Your CPU and GPU choices will determine what the rest of your build will look like. The processor determines the motherboard, they both determine the RAM, and all of the above determine the power supply you're gonna need, and so on and so forth. So we'll start with the CPU. But before making any choices, consider this. What monitor are you gonna be using? What's the refresh rate on that monitor, and what is the resolution? If you don't know, find out, because it doesn't make any sense to spend $250 to $500 on a nice graphics card when you're only gonna be playing on a monitor that has a 60 Hz refresh rate and a 1080p resolution if you're leaning towards the spectrum of spending more on a graphics card. If you're spending over $500 to $600 on a graphics card and you're only playing at 1080p, you're wasting money. Just something to think about, because you want to meet your goals, but you don't want to waste a bunch of money on parts that are going to hold each other back and end up bottlenecking your system. So first things first, get used to using PC Part Picker. It's an amazing site that will automatically make sure the parts you're picking are compatible with each other, and you can also utilize the search filters to narrow down exactly what you need without searching through hundreds of different parts, things that you need to check off. Price. Just move the minimum to over $0 and it will remove any part that is out of stock or unavailable. Rating. Always check 4 and 5 stars to filter out bad or unrated products. Each part has a different set of filters, and we'll get into what you're looking for in each one. With the processor, you want to check how many cores you need, and for purely gaming, you really only need 6. And for CPU heavy workloads, you should use at least 6, preferably more. Focus on just 2 types of processors, Intel Core and AMD Ryzen. And for each one, the lowest I would go is on the Intel side, the i3-10100, and for Ryzen, the Ryzen 5 3600. Another gem that I like to use is userbenchmark.com. This helps you to pull the trigger on a single part if you've narrowed it down to just a couple and can't figure out which one's better. For me, motherboards fall into 2 categories, basic and bougie. Basic boards are just that, basic. There's not a ton of features, they've got the minimal amount of heat sinks, no Wi-Fi, and are there just to get the job done. There's nothing wrong with getting a basic board, but if you're looking for something more, then be bougie and get one with an integrated I/O shield, Wi-Fi, all the heatsink, RGB lighting, etc. It doesn't hurt to make sure that there are at least some heat sinks to protect your board from malfunctioning, and as long as it's the right socket for your CPU, you should be fine. Again, PC Part Picker will only allow you to choose motherboards that are compatible with your CPU. And if for some reason it lets you pick one, it'll let you know when something's up. I mentioned my favorite budget motherboards in a little short that I released a little while back, so go check that out. Also, as a side note, if you're going AMD, something to look for in the motherboard is the BIOS flash feature. In layman's terms, you can think of the BIOS as the operating system for your motherboard. What happens is, the BIOS version of a motherboard isn't always completely up to date with the newest generation CPUs, and if you end up getting a motherboard that maybe's been on the shelves for a little while, it may need to be updated to the latest version to be compatible with your newer generation CPU. And you can only do that by going online, downloading the driver, and installing it. But you can't boot with a newer CPU on a motherboard with an older BIOS. So the flash feature is an easy way to update the BIOS without an old CPU. The gold standard for RAM is 16 gigabytes in the form of 2 8-gig sticks, and the sweet spot is 3200 megatransfers per second, MHz. But if you're gonna be using your computer as a workstation or doing any kind of production work, video editing, rendering, stuff like that, then you're gonna wanna have at least 32 gigs of RAM. It's really gonna help those workloads. Now, usually I buy exclusively new parts, almost always off Amazon, but how you get your graphics card is completely up to you. You can probably find a really nice card under retail price on secondhand marketplace, but do so at your own risk. You never know what the last person did to the card, if it even works, or if you're just gonna end up getting scammed altogether. Don't let that deter you from finding a good deal though, because they are out there. Just do your homework before purchasing from a private seller. There are 2 main graphics card manufacturers, NVIDIA and AMD. And each manufacturer has their pros and cons, but honestly, as long as you can get a hold of a decent card, that's all that really matters. The general consensus though is that NVIDIA is better for gaming, and AMD has more affordable options. So with the vast majority of people playing on a 1080p gaming monitor, which is what I play on, my lowest recommendations for a graphics card would be for NVIDIA, the 1650 Super, and for AMD, the RX 580. And with performance topping out at 1080p, The highest you would want to go is a 3070 for NVIDIA and a 6800 XT for AMD. Anything beyond that, and that's when you're going into the 1440p range and up. And it's at that point where you're wasting money. And just remember that if you opt for a beefier graphics card, you're gonna need a beefier CPU to back it up. You can look up YouTube videos running your favorite game with the specs that you're gonna be running and see for yourself how your system will perform. As long as the graphics card usage is pegged near 100% and the CPU usage isn't going over the 50 to 60% range, there's no bottleneck and you're fine. For the storage, you really just wanna stick with an M.2 drive or a solid state drive, which is an SSD. Nobody really uses the traditional hard disk drives anymore. They're just really slow, especially for gaming and load times. It's not ideal for anything other than backup. I recommend a minimum 500 gigs. The sweet spot for generally most people is at least 1 terabyte. I always go for an M.2 because it's literally hassle-free. You just put it in and screw it down and it's installed. There's no cables. There are 3 main sizes for motherboards as well, and you need to make sure that your size is going to fit your case. Both cases and motherboards are categorized by the same form factors: ATX, MATX, ITX, and so on. The general rule here is that smaller motherboards can fit into larger cases, not the other way around. So as long as your motherboard is the same form factor or smaller in your case, you're good. When you do go about picking your case, always opt for airflow over aesthetics. Performance is always more important than it looking flashy. And for airflow, the best that you can go for is for it to have a mesh front panel, a lot like the one in my first video. You may also want to pick up some extra case fans because most cases only come with 1 or 2, and I like to have at least 4. That's up to you. But usually the stock fans that come with the case aren't that great anyway. And last but not least, you want to pick a power supply, and this is not where you want to cheap out. At the very least, you should get an 80+ bronze rated power supply. And a good rule of thumb is to always give your system a little bit of headroom as far as wattage goes. When you build out your PC in PCPartPicker.com, you'll notice at the top of the screen on the right side what your system's estimated wattage will be. Take that number, open your calculator, multiply that number by 100, and then divide by 80. This result should be the very bottom of the threshold for the wattage of your power supply. And I usually go about 100 watts or a little bit more over to give my system that headroom that it should have. I know that was probably a lot, but if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I hope this helps you bypass a lot of the time that I had to take when I built my first PC. It took me ages to watch YouTube videos, look up things on Google, compare parts on Amazon and PC Part Picker and User Benchmark. It really just took forever. And if you've gotten any value out of this video, please hit the like button. I would really appreciate it because it helps to push this video out to other people, so maybe it could help them too. And as promised, here are the parts lists for 3 different budgets. Just pause to take notes or just a screenshot. And there are both Intel and AMD options for each budget. You can easily snap up these parts and have yourself a nice build ready to go. And if you need help building it yourself, you can check out my first video that I made where I took my wife's PC apart and put it all back together so you can see exactly how it's done. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified when I post a new video. And again, thank you so much for watching, and until next time.